All right, let's just dive right into this. You've probably seen it, right? Thousands of people are screaming, cameras are everywhere, and right in the middle of it all, someone is eating an amount of food that it doesn't seem possible. It just seems to defy physics. This isn't your average backyard barbecue. This is the absolutely wild world of modern competitive eating. And today we're going to pull back the curtain and figure out what is really going on here.
So let's start at the very top, the pinnacle. The current world record, held by the one and only Joey Chestnut, is a staggering 76 hot dogs and buns. But look, the number itself is wild, but the really mind-bending part is the time. He did all that in just 10 minutes. 10! Do the math. That's more than 7 hot dogs a minute. It's basically one every 8 seconds. Just try to imagine that pace for a second.
And if the sheer number of hot dogs didn't blow your mind, think about the calories. We're talking over 20,000 calories in that 10-minute sprint. To give you some perspective, that is more than an entire week's worth of food for an average person, all consumed in less time than it takes to get a pizza delivered. It's absolutely off the charts.
So how in the world do we even begin to understand this? Well, here's our roadmap. We're going to look at how this all started, from a weird sideshow feat to a massive festival. Then we'll get into the rules of the game that actually turn this into a sport. After that, we'll explore the insane training regimen these guys go through. And yes, they are athletes. Then we have to talk about the dark side, the health risks, the body's burden. That leads us to the big moral question. Is this just gluttony or is it something else? And finally, we'll ask what our fascination with all this really says about us.
You know, it feels like such a modern thing, doesn't it? Like something that could only exist now. But the truth is, the idea of extreme eating has been around for a very, very long time. This is not some new craze. It has some surprisingly deep roots.
Let's rewind the clock way, way back to the 1630s. You had guys like Nicholas Wood, the great eater of Kent, who was basically a local celebrity for his eating stunts. Then you fast forward to 1878 in Toronto, you get the first actual pie eating contest we know of, and it was for charity, believe it or not. Now, that famous story about the Nathan's contest starting in 1916, well, we'll get to that in a second because there's a twist. The real game changer was 1997. That's when the IFOC was formed, and it took all these local contests and turned them into a professional, regulated sport.
And here's that twist I was talking about. You know that classic origin story, right? 4 immigrants having a hot dog eating contest on the 4th of July to prove who was the most patriotic? It's a fantastic story. The only problem? It's completely made up. A promoter just admitted in 2010 that he invented the whole thing back in the 70s as a publicity stunt. It just goes to show you showmanship and marketing have been baked into this thing from the very beginning.
Okay, so if you're going to turn eating into a professional sport, you can't just have people show up and go wild. You need rules. You need structure. And with a real governing body came a formal set of regulations designed to bring some order to the chaos and, figure out who actually won.
And the organization that makes it all happen is Major League Eating, or MLE. This is the big leagues. This is the NFL of food. It started out as the IFOC, and they're the ones who sanction all of the official events, create the pro circuit, and get these things broadcast on ESPN. They single-handedly turned a bunch of local oddities into a legitimate, recognized sport with ranked professionals.
So what are the rules? Well, they actually define the strategy. First off, most contests are short, like an 8 or 10-minute sprint. That dunking you see, it's absolutely crucial. Soaking the buns in water makes them go down way faster. But you can't just stuff your face. Chipmunking, which is holding food in your cheeks to swallow later, is usually a no-go. And probably the most important rule, what goes down must stay down. If you have a reversal, you're disqualified, instantly. And of course, you've got judges watching like hawks, counting every bite to make sure it's all legit.
So this brings us to the eaters themselves. It's so easy to just see the spectacle and dismiss it, but what does it actually take to get your body ready for a challenge this extreme? Well, the answer might surprise you. It takes an incredible amount of discipline, a lot like any other professional athlete.
This quote from the champ Joey Chestnut really changes how you think about it, doesn't it? He's not just saying, I like to eat a lot. He's comparing his training directly to a runner's. It's a skill. It's a physical capacity that you have to build up and work on constantly. This is not something you just decide to do one afternoon.
So what does that training actually look like? It's a whole cycle. Once a week, they'll do a full-on practice run, a contest simulation, to build their stomach capacity and work on their speed. Then comes recovery.
eating really clean, high-fiber stuff to help everything process. After that is a cleanse period, just to let the body reset. And then, leading into the next big practice, they might fast for up to 2 days. It's this super calculated rhythm of stress, recover, prepare, repeat.
Now here's the thing that shatters the stereotype for most people. You probably picture a competitive eater as being really overweight, but that's often not the case. There's this idea called the belt of fat theory. The thinking is that a layer of belly fat physically presses on the stomach and stops it from expanding all the way. So being leaner actually gives your stomach more room to stretch. It's a real competitive advantage, which is why so many of the top pros are in surprisingly good shape.
All right, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. You can't see someone eat 76 hot dogs and not wonder, what on earth does that do to a person's body? Because this is not natural, and it comes with some very real and some very scary risks.
And we're not just talking about a bad stomachache. Medical experts point to some serious potential dangers. There's something called gastroparesis, where your stomach muscles just get so weak they stop working properly, basically stomach paralysis. You can suffer from intractable nausea, gastric perforation, which is literally tearing a hole in your stomach, or esophageal tears. Long-term, some worry that you could lose your ability to feel full, leading to obesity. And of course, the most immediate danger, especially for anyone who isn't a trained pro, is choking.
So with all this talk of binging and fasting and this intense focus on food, you have to ask a really tough but really important question. Where's the line between this sport and something like a clinical binge eating disorder? It's a really critical thing to consider. When you actually compare them side by side, some really key psychological differences start to pop up. Experts say competitive eating is incredibly methodical and planned out. Binge eating disorder, on the other hand, is usually impulsive. The goal for an eater is clear: win the contest. For someone with the disorder, it's often defined by a feeling of a total lack of control. And then there's the context. One's a public show, the other is often done in secret and followed by a lot of shame and distress, which is very different from a professional's calculated post-contest fasting.
Okay, so let's move beyond the physical body and talk about the bigger ethical questions. For a lot of people, watching someone stuff their face with mountains of food for sport just feels wrong. Is it just harmless fun, or is it a morally bankrupt display in a world that has so many problems?
And this comment right here, this really gets to the heart of the main argument against it. The visceral reaction is that this is just pure gluttony, that it's incredibly wasteful to see all this food being consumed for entertainment when there are people in the world who are starving. It's a really powerful emotional argument, and it's one you hear all the time.
But, and this is a really big but, when you actually look at the numbers, the food waste argument gets a lot more complicated. The key thing here is scale. The total amount of food used in every single professional eating contest all year is less than 1/100th of 1% of the food we waste. For comparison, households are responsible for about 44% of food waste, and restaurants another 33%. Statistically, the food in these contests is barely even a drop in the bucket.
And that leads to a bigger point. The tragic problem of world hunger isn't because we don't have enough food. We actually produce more than enough food to feed every single person on Earth. The real problems are systemic. They're about logistics, distribution, politics, and corruption. So those 76 hot dogs, even if they were saved, they wouldn't begin to solve those massive, complex global issues.
So if the food waste argument doesn't really hold up to scrutiny, what's left? What is this all about? For this last part, let's zoom all the way out and ask a bigger question. What does the fact that we're so fascinated by this spectacle, what does that reveal about our culture?
This is where it gets really deep. Some cultural critics argue that competitive eating is a kind of performance art. It's fundamentally transgressive. It's about breaking the normal, polite rules of eating in the most extreme way possible. And by doing that, it acts like a funhouse mirror, reflecting two of the biggest hallmarks of our culture: abundance and consumerism. It takes those ideas and dials them up to an absurd, spectacular level for our entertainment.
And so that's the final question I want to leave you with. Is competitive eating just a ridiculous, harmless sport where some incredibly unique people push the boundaries of what the human body can do? Or is it something more? Is it a bizarre ritual that reflects the most excessive parts of our modern world right back at us? Like the sport itself, the answer is probably a lot to chew on.